Presentation by ITACUS, Admiraal and Antonia, Cornaro, 10 years of ITACUS Underground Space Unveiled. They have both written a very nice book, which they are going to talk about, and I'm very sure that this book will be seen as a landmark on the use of underground space.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to give a presentation on our book, but in many ways, the book that we have written is the story of ITACUS in the past 10 years. And to start with, I would just like to quote from the acknowledgement section of the book, where we've written the following. We are very grateful for the continuing support that we receive from the International Tunneling and Underground Space Association. We thank its current president, Tarcisio Celestino, and its past presidents, in particular Søren Eskesen, Martin Knights, and Harvey Parker, who understood the importance of unveiling underground space to a broader audience. We also want to express our gratitude to Olivier Villon, the ITA Executive Director, for his support for our work and the work of the ITA Committee on Underground Space, ITACUS. Without our fellow steering board members, the members of the advisory board, and indeed the committee members, we would not have found the inspiration to write this book. And I think that holds true. I think that we've had an enormous opportunity in the past 10 years to, on behalf of this association, advocate the use of underground space. We have met a lot of people, we have been asked a lot of questions, and in many ways I think and we hope that what we've written in this book answers those questions and reflects on that journey. And with that, we will start our presentation.
Dear President, dear Executive Council, dear ITA family, I'm Antonia Cornaro, the co-chair of the ITA Committee on Underground Space. What we wanted to say to you is we've written a book which is very much a story about the work we have been doing in ITACUS for the past 10 years it is now that the committee has been in existence. So it is really about the quest for the urban underground space, for an urban underground future. And we are very much a committee, as you know, that reaches out to A, the general public, and B, to related disciplines such as architects, designers, urban planners, transportation professionals, anyone interested in the built environment. So keep in mind that this book has not been written for civil engineers. It has been written for anyone interested in this domain. And in that, we want to broaden people's perspective on what the underground space can achieve in the future of our cities.
Using underground space is but a small part of a much larger puzzle that planners and geologists are trying to comprehend. It is a struggle, but people are pressing ahead, just like those early frontier pioneers, as they see the enormous opportunities and feel it's the only way forward as far as our cities are concerned. And in this illustration from the book, I think you can clearly see how pioneers have been entering into the subsurface, into the underground space, if you like. We go to great depths for some of our human interventions, and sometimes we stay quite close to the surface. But I think the main point that we are making is that in a lot of these situations, all these activities take place without any due consideration being given to planning. So it's very much based on a first come, first served basis. But the other thing you can see from this image, I think, is that the subsurface or underground space is a complicated being. Our cities are complicated. Planners talk about the urban metabolism. They talk about the urban being. In trying to understand, in trying to comprehend how a city works, what its city needs are. But in the same way, geologists do the same when it comes to the subsurface. And we found in our journey that that is where the complications arise from. It is not just that you can use underground space for certain purposes. It is the question of whether you can actually do it, have the right to do it, if you're not interfering in processes that are going on already. And this is what complicates, I think, the last urban frontier.
So the key question is, how will the use of underground space contribute to the city we need? How will it create the future we want? That is what an urban underground future is about, enabling cities to develop sustainably, be resilient, be livable, and be inclusive. When we look at this image, what do we see? We see a city street, a sidewalk rather. A sidewalk that is livable, that is hospitable, that is accessible, that is lovable, and that is livable. And that makes the city livable. How do we achieve such sidewalks? We achieve them by optimizing our underground space in our cities, by using it to the fullest potential, and by creating connections and linkages. And I quote from the book, "Without creating connections in the underground landscape, the subsurface remains distinctly detached from the urban fabric, with only the entrance and exit points forming some kind of linkage. The object in the underground landscapes are at most basement extensions of existing surface buildings or underground networks existing to serve a utility or transport purpose." We're all familiar with those. Without connecting these various singular uses, there is no urban tissue below the surface. Without corridors acting the way that streets do at the surface, underground development will remain isolated from the city and a long way from contributing to the livable cities we need. It was Jane Jacobs in 1961 who pointed out the importance of sidewalks and streets. Think of a city and what comes to mind? It's streets. If a city's streets look interesting, the city looks interesting. If they look dull, the city looks dull.
Chapter 2 of the book is about achieving harmony between humanity and nature. And it discusses urban underground sustainability by looking at the way that we have been intervening as humanity in the subsurface and what this has caused. And I quote from our book, "Human intervention in the subsurface stretches from the Neolithic, when humans mined for flint to form tools and weapons, to the present-day extraction of minerals and carbon fuels. And one of the lessons we have learned is that abandoned mines or large-scale extraction can, in certain situations, influence life on the surface. Soil subsidence, sinkholes, or human-induced earthquakes are all unforeseen effects of our interventions below the surface, sometimes impacting the ecosystem long after the last activity took place. All of this demonstrates that we need to have a deep knowledge of not only the suitability of the subsurface to carry out our planned developments, but also of the long-term impact that these developments can have on the subsurface and consequently the surface. The geological and geochemical compositions caused by previous interventions determine the suitability in the present for subsurface and surface developments. Infrastructure development has varied little over centuries from the basic concept of roads and railways. Postmodern infrastructures require a radical rethink for more than one reason. Firstly, in order for them to develop in harmony with nature, and secondly, a rethink could also provide new ways of financing these infrastructures as they gain multiple uses and enhance urban ecosystems. Sustainable urban underground development in this way could help cities to become more resilient, inclusive and livable, contributing to quality of life, but also delivering health benefits by reducing city heat island effects and pollution and providing more green public spaces to be in.
How was it to write this book? What do you think? Do you think we hated each other's guts sometimes? Yes, we did. Do you think it required a lot of emailing, WhatsApping, texting, phone calls, online meetings, meetings with our editor in London? Yes, it did. But I have to say it was a really gratifying and very rewarding experience. We had a very supportive editor with ICE Publishing in London. And in fact, ICE Publishing were the ones who addressed us at a conference in London where we were moderating for ICE. And they said, this topic is fascinating and it's a niche in our series of technical publications. And we would really like to have a book on underground space. Would you be willing to write it? And we looked at each other and we thought, writing a book, we are quite busy people, but it sounds like a challenge, and it sounds a challenge we want to take on. Yes, we will write a book. And we wrote the book. It took a little bit longer than initially planned, but quite on schedule, and ICE is really behind us, and they unfortunately can't be here to sell the book on the premises. But when we had an event in London last week at a Think Deep UK workshop, the publisher was there themselves. And so a really rewarding experience, and as I said, a lot of WhatsApping and data volume was consumed in the process. Which brings me to the chapter 4 on spatial design, creating a new urban tissue. One of the reasons that the development of underground space has stagnated over the years could lie in the inability of its development to integrate into other developments, to create public spaces and become a vibrant part of the urban fabric. In short, underground space is mostly dull and not a place you want to be in. Or so is the general conception often. Now, what can we do to change this? In chapter 4, we write, one of the reasons why the development of underground space has stagnated, and that's the quote I just did. So, how can we go about finding examples and creating examples that do not do that? Like this example in Burst-Travers, Rotterdam, which is basically a sunken -1 level and has brought trees and water to that level to create a feeling of a street experience that is accessible 24 hours a day, and that is a convivial space for people to walk through, and also to rest and talk and have some respite from the urban bustle. So the only examples really worldwide that seem to be capable of achieving this kind of experience and connectivity are the large underground cities we find in Canada and China, and also to some extent in South Korea and Japan. Although adverse climate is often cited as a reason for the success of the Canadian underground cities, the real reason surely is the ability to integrate underground networks and objects in the underground landscape in such a way that a new urban tissue is created. This new tissue, in many ways, offers the same attractions as streets on the surface, thereby attracting people and stimulating continuous development.
Chapter 5 is on a subject engineers always try to avoid, but believe me, it is something you should read. It is about policy building and urban planning. And including underground space in spatial policy plans or other strategic plans is not something we see happening in the world at a large scale. And the cause is not so much the disinterest of policymakers, decision makers or planners, but it's more due to a lack of awareness and understanding. And I think this is where the real work of ITACUS really comes in. This is what we've been doing in the past 10 years. We've been talking to the policymakers and the decision makers and the planners. We've been trying to make them aware and to understand. But the best way to do this is to actually show that you are capable of delivering solutions that contribute to some of the challenges that they are facing. And in the book, we've taken the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations as an example of this. We've identified within the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, 7 goals to which underground space use can actually contribute. You may have found when you got your Congress bag the little cubes that you can fold, and if you haven't, when you go out of this room at the desk where the bags are handed out, you can find these cubes. You can fold a little cube from your desk showing you those Sustainable Development Goals and surely showing that there is a world of opportunities out there for underground space. But what we need to do is we need to show how we can contribute. And I'll give you one example we will be discussing this afternoon during the ITACUS open session. And that is how can underground space contribute to Sustainable Development Goal number 1, which is zero hunger. At first you might ask, right, zero hunger, underground space, how does that work? But we've found actually quite a few examples of where abandoned underground spaces are actually being repurposed for urban farming. And this afternoon the discussion will be about how can we actually create underground spaces for green farming, farming that is a lot more sustainable than the current way of farming, to feed the people in the cities of the future. And it might seem at first glance not something that is obvious, but what we have to realize is that as the world population grows, we need more land to produce food. On average, we need 6 million hectares of arable land, extra land, every year. Through soil degradation, through intensive farming, we are actually losing 12 million hectares a year globally. I don't have to explain to you that those figures don't add up. So it means we need to look for new ways to actually secure food in the cities of the future. And we believe that underground space has a role and can actually play a role in that. And we also believe it can do so in the 6 other development goals we have identified.
In chapter 7, we talk about building for people and to create valued underground spaces. This is a very exciting new project in Seoul, South Korea. It's the Women's University. An architectural competition was hosted, and I think 10 world-renowned architects submitted proposals. Most of them, or I would say 9 out of 10, involved building large skyscrapers, monumental architecture. But there was one architect, Dominique Perrault, who said, no, I want to do something different. I want to create a space that is for people and that works as a university campus. And he really opened up the underground and integrated it with the surface and created a university campus that not only works for its student, but that has become a lovable and livable place in Seoul. And I quote here from the book, "We have seen in previous chapters that there are numerous examples of beautiful underground spaces that are well thought out, appealing, and provide a unique user experience in many ways. An underground space provides both architects and artists with a challenge to work with the earth in shaping and forming an underground building. In this, Dominique Perrault stands out from his peers. In an interview when asked what fascinates him about the underground, he said, 'To put it simple, you can increase architectural density not only by going upward, but by going underground as well. When you build downwards, the architecture disappears, and there is room for green areas and public spaces. Architecture can be put center stage again by using valleys or clearings, as with the Women's University of Seoul, which he completed in 2008. The way daylight arrives underground construction also offers terrific benefits in terms of energy. The ground keeps things cool in the summer and warm in winter. This means the Women's University has reduced its energy cost by 60%.
So my time to let you in into some secrets about writing a book. Antonia is an urban planner, and I'm a civil engineer, and we have remarkable different opinions when it comes to deadlines. But they might be a bit different than you think, because to me as a civil engineer, I actually find that deadlines are quite fluid. They are reminders that you should have done something, but they can actually, they just pass in time. Antonia actually thinks a deadline is a contract, and you can't pass a deadline without delivering, because that constitutes a breach of contract. I can tell you those opinions merged as we reached the end of the book writing. But it did take some time, and the last summer holidays, I can tell you there was a lot of internet traffic going on between a sailing boat in Greece and a nice holiday cottage in Denmark. Which brings me to chapter 9 of the book, which is about a subject I think we're all very interested in, which is basically how do we actually finance our projects. And it's called Investing in Underground Space is All About Value Capture. And we started that chapter actually quite philosophically, and we quote the Sorites paradox, which basically says, if you have a heap of sand, and if you take away the sand a grain at a time, at what time does that heap of sand stop being a heap of sand? And I think we quoted that paradox because we see there's a parallel with the way we look at our cities and the way we're running out of space in our cities. And we came across this strange phenomenon that in actual fact, human society is not so much aware of very slow processes. And if we look at climate change, that is an example. We all see how horrible the effects of climate change could be, but we all find that the extra sunshine we get is rather comforting, and we do not associate it directly with the fact that the climate is changing and is actually going to cause quite a lot of problems in the future. So when you go to policymakers and explain to them that they mustn't run out of space in the city, and it might seem a good idea to start investing in projects that might actually be a little bit more expensive but would enhance the urban fabric a lot more, they still tend to choose for using the last bit of space there is in the city. And the question we put in the book to you is, do we really want to wait with our cities until we get situations like they have in Singapore and Hong Kong, where underground space is being explored in a very good way, but it is done not through choice, but through necessity, because those cities have actually run out of space. And the question is whether if you start thinking about how you can integrate underground space into the urban fabric, if through urban processes you cannot start those processes earlier. And what we also identify is that we talk a lot about the value which is brought by underground space, the societal benefits that come from underground space. And we have to keep doing that because that is the way we can justify our projects. But justification of a project is not the same as financing a project. So we also need to look at how we can make projects more bankable. How do we make projects ready for investment by private? This is what chapter 9 of our book is about. And then maybe you can create projects like this one, which is from the city of Rotterdam. In the final chapter of our book, we go into the question of how disruption is creating new paradigms for an urban underground future. And we say that space, time, and speed, all three, are of essence if we are to achieve the much needed disruption and paradigm shifts that will challenge our conception of where we live, where we work, and how we travel. And an urban underground future, how will that feature in all this? We believe it offers as yet untapped potentials, and not just in terms of spatial development and physical use. Underground space will become vital for our survival in that it offers heat for energy and storage for water. It provides shelter and the ability to create connections that bypass obstacles that we have created on the surface. As such, it allows for efficient straight-line networks, minimizing distance and maximizing connectivity. It does require imagination. It does require adapting legislation. And it might need more advanced and faster technologies.
But in the end, it is our belief that the use of underground space will prove to be as disruptive, as challenging initially, and as successfully in the end as PayPal, as Tesla, as Uber, as Airbnb, as Hyperloop, as The Boring Company, as SpaceX, and the eventual colonization of other planets. We hope that what we have written in this book has given a glimpse into the possibilities that the future holds for underground space and how to potentially achieve these. We hope that we have shown what needs to be adapted to allow it to happen. But above all, we hope that this book will inspire future generations to look at the world below our feet in a different and appreciative way, and make them tap into the as yet unforeseen opportunities that will allow humankind to survive and prosper on this planet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonia and Han. All of us are grateful to them because it's contributions of people like them doing this on their time that open so much possibilities, not only for us professionals, but I would say for the society. And this is a very good example of my simple statement yesterday opening this Congress when I mentioned about possibilities of networking. This was the result of a civil engineering meeting urban planner. So it's also inspiration for all of you to meet somebody else, not exactly with the same background, and come up with contributions so good as this one. Go ahead.
One last quote from the acknowledgements from this book. We are grateful to the continuous support we receive from the International Tunneling and Underground Space Association. We thank its current president, Tarcisio Celestino, and its past presidents, in particular, Soren Eskesen, Martin Knights, and Harvey Parker, who understood the importance of unveiling underground space to a broader audience. We also want to express our gratitude to Olivier Villon, the ITA Executive Director, for his support for our work and the work of the ITA on Underground Space Committee. Without our fellow steering board members, the members of the advisory board, and indeed the committee members, we would not have found the inspiration to write this book. Thank you.
Now you've heard it twice, but let me tell you,
I didn't know
this
that.
really emphasizes that really comes from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you.